you let that fraud put a ring on your finger, don't expect me to sit in the front row and smile about it, my mother said, and then she walked out of the rehearsal dinner with her heels clicking like she was stamping out a fire. 40 of our closest people were already seated. My fiancé's parents had flown in from Tucson. I stood there next to a half-eaten plate of bruschetta in a restaurant I'd booked 8 months in advance, and I felt every single pair of eyes land on me. What my mother didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the woman she had told me died when I was 6 years old was sitting in a memory care facility 90 minutes north of us, very much alive, and she had no idea I existed anymore. I'm going to tell you the whole thing. But before I do, if any part of this already feels familiar, if you've ever been made to feel small by the people who are supposed to love you most, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read all of them. I really do. Let me start before the rehearsal dinner, because the dinner was just the place where it finally cracked open. My name is Hollis Brennan. I'm 31 and I work as a labor and delivery nurse at a hospital in the suburbs outside Columbus, Ohio. I'd been doing it for 9 years. I've caught babies in elevators and held the hands of women who were terrified and women who were ecstatic and women who were both at the same time. I'm good at reading a room. I'm good at knowing when something is wrong before anyone says it out loud. That instinct, it turns out, was the only inheritance my family ever really gave me, and it took me 31 years to understand why I had it. I met Wesley at a Habitat for Humanity build in the spring of last year. I'd signed up through the hospital's volunteer program, mostly because I needed something to do with my hands that didn't involve charting. Wesley was the site lead. He owns a custom carpentry and cabinetry shop, 11 employees, builds out kitchens and libraries for people with more money than sense. But on Saturdays, he runs builds for families who've never owned anything. The first thing I noticed about him was that he didn't talk down to the volunteers who didn't know a joist from a stud. He just showed them. Patient. Calloused hands, sawdust in the creases of his knuckles, this quiet way of making you feel capable. We were dating by June. By the fall I knew. By Christmas he proposed in his workshop, with a ring he'd designed himself around my late grandmother's stone, except I didn't know it was my grandmother's stone yet, and that's a part of this story I'll get to. I called my mother that night to tell her. Her name is Genevieve, and she's a name partner at a wealth management firm downtown. She manages portfolios for old Columbus money, the kind of families who've had the same pew at the same church for 4 generations. She has worn the same uniform my entire life. Cream blazers, gold at the throat, a smile she can turn on and off like a faucet. When I told her Wesley had proposed, there was a silence on the line that I'd learned to dread as a kid. A carpenter, she finally said. He owns a company, Mom. He has 11 employees. He works with his hands, Hollis. Do you understand what that means for how people will see you? I understood exactly what it meant. It meant nothing to me and everything to her. The first time I brought Wesley to dinner at her house. Back in the summer, she'd done this thing she does where she asks questions that sound like interest, but are actually a deposition. Where did he go to school? He didn't. He apprenticed. What were his parents' professions? His dad was a long-haul trucker. His mom did medical billing. Did he own his home or rent? Rented, but was saving for a place with a real shop. Each answer made her mouth get a little tighter, and by dessert she'd developed a sudden headache and gone upstairs, leaving me to clear the table while Wesley pretended he hadn't noticed. He'd noticed. In the car he just took my hand and said, "It's okay, we don't marry the parents." But the closer the wedding got, the worse she got. She refused to help pay for anything, which stunned me because she'd spent a small fortune on my older sister Delaney's wedding 4 years ago. 300 guests at a country club, a string quartet, a chocolate fountain the size of a toddler. For me, I got silence and a credit card bill I was paying off in installments. $11,000 of my own savings gone. For a wedding my mother treated like a funeral. I should tell you about my grandmother now, because she's the center of all of this even though I thought she'd been gone for 25 years. Her name was Adelaide. My mother's mother. I have these fragments of her, the kind of memories that feel more like photographs than experiences. a kitchen that smelled like cardamom, soft hands, a song she hummed that I can't name but would recognize instantly if I heard it. She let me stand on a chair and crack eggs into a bowl and never once got mad when the shells got in. And then, when I was 6, she was gone, and the way it was explained to me was that she'd gotten very sick very fast, and there'd be a small service, just family, because that's what Grandma wanted. I remember the service. I remember a room with folding chairs and a table at the front with flowers and a framed photograph and a small urn. I remember my mother crying, which terrified me, because my mother did not cry. She cried at that service. I watched her shoulders shake. You don't fake that. That's what I told myself for 25 years, whenever the math of it felt strange. You don't fake grief like that. After the service, every photo of my grandmother disappeared from my mother's house. When I asked, she said it was too painful, that we needed to look forward, not back. I had exactly one picture left, one she'd missed, tucked into an old photo album in my own childhood keepsake box. My grandmother holding me as a newborn, both of us a little blurry, her eyes crinkled up at the camera. They were the same shape as mine, the same color. Over the years, I'd ask, maybe once a year, and I'd get the same 3 sentences. She was a strong woman. She worked hard. She wanted better for us. And then my mother would change the subject so smoothly you almost didn't notice the door closing. Now, the wedding. The night of the rehearsal dinner, my mother showed up 40 minutes late. She sat at the far end of the table, declined wine, and answered Wesley's parents' friendly questions in clipped little sentences that made the whole table tense. When Wesley stood up to thank everyone for coming, to say a few words about how grateful he was to be marrying me, my mother set down her fork with a clink that cut him off, stood, and said the thing about the fraud and the front row. Then she left. I went home that night and didn't sleep. Wesley held me and said all the right things, but underneath the hurt there was something else nagging at me, something I couldn't name. A wrongness. The same feeling I get at work right before a patient's blood pressure crashes. The next morning, I got a text from my mother. We need to talk before the ceremony. It's important. Bridal suite, 1 o'clock. The wedding was at 2. At a restored barn venue out in the country. White string lights and reclaimed wood, the kind of place Wesley loved because you could see the craftsmanship in it. I'd paid for that too. I got there early, around 12:30, and the coordinator walked me back to a little room they used for the bride, a converted tack room with a couch, a long mirror, and a window that looked out over the gravel lot. My sister Delaney was there. She's 35, and she's always been the one who did everything right in our mother's eyes. Private college, a finance job. Mom helped her land a husband named from the right family. She helped me into my dress, ivory, simple, no train, bought off a clearance rack and tailored by a woman who did alterations out of her living room. She zipped me up and met my eyes in the mirror and said, "He'll come around. Mom always comes around." "Does she though?" I said. Delaney didn't answer. At 1 o'clock exactly, my mother knocked. She came in wearing a gray suit, pearls, her wedding guest armor. She didn't sit. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She stood by the door with her hands folded and looked at me the way she looks at a portfolio she's about to liquidate. "Hollis, I'm only going to say this once, so I need you to actually hear me. This is a mistake. Wesley is not the man you build a life with. He doesn't have the education, the standing, the security to give you the life you're supposed to have. You're too caught up in the romance of it to see clearly. You'll regret this." My hands had started shaking. I held my bouquet tighter. White roses and eucalyptus that Wesley's mother had arranged at 4 that morning. "I love him, Mom." "Love doesn't pay for anything. I built a career from nothing. Your grandmother built a life from nothing. We did that so you and your sister wouldn't have to settle, and you're throwing it away for a man who saws wood for a living. He builds things people keep for a lifetime. He just signed a contract to do the millwork for the new public library branch. That's $250,000 of work, Mom. He's not a man who saws wood. He's a man who runs a business." Her jaw tightened, and she said the thing I'll never forget. "If you marry him, don't expect me to walk in there and pretend to be proud. I will not stand up in front of those people and put my name behind this." And the strangest thing happened. The shaking stopped. Because I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and I finally understood something I'd been dancing around my whole life. She didn't love me. She loved the version of me she'd designed. And the moment I stopped being that version, I stopped being worth anything to her. Then don't, I said. She blinked. What? Don't walk me down the aisle. I'll do it myself. I've been doing everything myself my whole life. Why stop now? Something flickered across her face. For a second I thought it was hurt. Now I know it was calculation. Then it smoothed over and she said, "You'll regret this." And she walked out. I heard her heels on the wood floor, heard the big barn door roll open and bang shut, heard a car door, heard gravel. She was gone. Delaney came back in, pale. She left. She actually left. She's pulling out of the lot. I sat down on the couch in my dress and I couldn't feel my hands. There were 120 people in that barn. Coworkers, friends, Wesley's enormous warm family, a few cousins I barely knew. They'd driven from all over. They bought us a stand mixer and a set of good knives and a gift card to a hardware store because Wesley had joked about it. And the woman who was supposed to walk me in had just driven away rather than be seen approving of my life. I sat there for what felt like an hour but was probably 6 minutes. Somebody was playing acoustic guitar out in the barn, the same little instrumental loop, over and over, and it started to sound like a clock counting down. Then there was a knock. Not the coronator's polite tap. A firm knock. Delaney opened the door. It was the officiant, a woman named Reverend Tilly who done our pre-marriage sessions, kind, 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain. She had a strange look on her face. "Hollis, honey, I don't want to add to your mourning, but there's a woman here who says she has to see you. She came in a wheelchair van just now. There's a nurse with her and another woman. The older lady, she's very emotional. She keeps calling you Bertie." The floor dropped out from under me. Bertie. Nobody had called me Bertie since I was 6 years old. Since before my grandmother died. It was hers. It was the only person in the world who ever called me that. "She says she's your grandmother," Reverend Tilly said, almost apologetic. "She says she's been waiting 25 years to see you again." My grandmother died in 2001. I was at the service. I watched my mother cry. I saw the urn. I stood up. My legs didn't feel like mine. Where is she? By the side entrance, with the nurse and the other woman. I walked past the reverend, past my sister, down the little hall toward the side door of the barn, my dress whispering against the planks. The door was propped open and the afternoon light was pouring in, and there, in the doorway, was an old woman in a wheelchair. She was small. 86, I learned later. Her hands shook on the armrests. She wore a cardigan buttoned to the throat and a scarf and shoes that someone had clearly polished that morning. Her hair was white and thin and carefully set. And her eyes? Her eyes were the exact shape and color of mine. I stopped. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She was crying, the silent way that old people cry when they've been holding something for a very long time. "Bertie," she said. Her voice trembled. Oh, look at you. You have my eyes. They told me you didn't want to know me. They told me you didn't want to know me. They told me you'd forgotten." I knelt down on the floor of that barn in my wedding dress, the ivory pooling around me, and I reached out and put my hand on hers. Warm, paper-thin skin. Real. "We buried you," I whispered. "I was at your funeral. I saw my mother cry." The woman standing behind the wheelchair stepped forward. 50s, nervous, a tote bag clutched to her chest. "I'm Marguerite. I'm your grandmother's niece, your mother's cousin. I live up near Sandusky. This is going to sound impossible, but your grandmother has been alive this entire time. She's been in the memory care facility outside Marion for almost 25 years. The words wouldn't arrange themselves into sense. "After my stroke," my grandmother said, her speech a little slurred, the cadence of someone whose brain had been hurt and healed crookedly, "I couldn't talk right, couldn't write. Your mother said she'd take care of everything, said it was temporary, and then I was in that place and nobody came. Year after year, I thought you grew up and forgot your old grandma. I thought you didn't want me." The third woman stepped forward, younger, maybe in her 30s, in scrubs. "I'm Tamsin. I'm an aide at Ridgeline Senior Living where your grandmother lives. I found out about your wedding 3 weeks ago. There was an announcement online, and it mentioned her, called her the late Adelaide Foley, but she's not late. She's in room 12. She's been in room 12 for almost 25 years. Your mother told us she had no family who could visit. She's paid in cash this whole time. Money orders sometimes. Never insurance. Never anything with a paper trail." My grandmother reached into the pocket of her cardigan with a trembling hand and pulled out a folded square of paper. She held it out to me. I opened it. It was an admission form. Ridgeline Senior Living. Dated March 2002. Resident Adelaide Foley. Admitted by Genevieve Brennan. Daughter and legal guardian. Under emergency contacts, in a clause about family, someone had written, "Resident has no other family able to provide care or visitation. Daughter is sole point of contact." And at the bottom, in my mother's narrow, perfect handwriting, her signature. The ceremony was supposed to start in 20 minutes. 120 people were sitting in that barn. And the woman who was supposed to walk me down the aisle had driven away. And the woman who should have, the woman my mother had buried alive in a story, was sitting right in front of me. "Grandma," I said. The word felt enormous in my mouth. "Can you do it? Will you walk me in? Will you give me away?" She let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. "I held you the day you were born. Let me do this. Let me do the one thing she stole from me." Wesley appeared at the side door. He'd heard the commotion. He took one look at me on the floor, at the old woman, at the paper in my hand, and he just got down on his knees next to me, sawdust still in the creases of his hands. "Whatever this is," he said quietly, "you're not alone in it. If you want to walk in with her, we walk. If you want to stop everything and figure this out, we stop. But you don't have to pick between getting married and getting the truth. We can have both today." I looked at my grandmother, at the woman I had grieved when I was a little girl, who had been 90 minutes away the whole time, doing puzzles and watching the door, thinking her family had thrown her away. "Okay," I said. "Okay, let's go." Marguerite took the handles of the chair. Tamsin walked close, a hand hovering near my grandmother's shoulder, protective. Reverend Tilly hurried back inside to tell the guitarist we were ready. The music changed. The double doors at the end of the barn swung open and every head turned. I'll never forget the sound the room made. A collective intake of breath, then this wave of whispering. In the third row, I saw an older man, a friend of the family from way back, half rise out of his chair, his hand at his mouth. I heard him say to the woman next to him, clear as anything, "That's Addie Foley. My God, that's Adelaide." We went slowly. The wheels of the chair made a soft sound on the plank floor. I kept my hand on my grandmother's shoulder, feeling her tremble, feeling our lost years in the shake of her. Up front, my sister Delaney had gone the color of paper. Her husband had a hand on her arm like he was keeping her in her seat. We reached the front. Reverend Tilly looked at my grandmother and improvised gently. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" My grandmother's voice shook, but it carried to every corner of that barn. "I do. Her grandmother, like I should have all along before they took me away." The whispering surged. She reached up with both trembling hands and took my hand and Wesley's and pressed them together. "You take care of my birdie," she said to him. "You be the family she should have had." I looked at the front row, at the empty chair where my mother was supposed to be sitting. It didn't look neutral anymore. It looked like an accusation. The ceremony went on. Wesley's vows had a line about chosen family, about the people who show up when the others walk out, and his voice broke on it. Mine had a line about being the person who stays, who doesn't put conditions on love, who doesn't price it by what someone does for a living. We both cried. Half the barn cried. Reverend Tilly pronounced us married. Wesley kissed me, and we turned to face the room and most of them weren't even looking at us. They were looking at the old woman in the wheelchair, and some of the older guests looked like they'd seen a ghost, because in a way they had. The reception was at the same venue, just the other end of the barn in the patio outside. By the time we sat down, the whispering had become something with weight to it. People bent together in little clusters. Phones came out. Somebody was looking something up. My grandmother sat between Wesley and me at the head table, in the seat that would have been my mother's, and she ate 3 bites of cake and patted my hand and said it was the best day she could remember. The older man from the 3rd row came over during cocktail hour, a glass trembling in his hand. "Addie," he said, "Addie Foley. But Genevieve, the service, in 2001, I sent a casserole, I signed the book. She said you passed. Cremation. Family only." "There was no body in any urn, Walt," my grandmother said. "There was never any body. I've been up in Marion the whole time." His glass nearly slipped. "She cried at that service. I saw her." "How does a person fake that?" I answered, and my voice came out cold and clear in a way that surprised me. "You don't fake it. You convince yourself you're doing the right thing, and then you tell the lie for so long it turns into the truth in your own head." More of the older guests came by through the hour, people who'd known my grandmother decades ago, who'd done business with her. Because here's the part I hadn't put together yet. My grandmother hadn't just been a sweet woman who hummed in a kitchen. Adelaide Foley had built and sold a regional chain of garden centers, 11 locations across central Ohio, sold the whole thing in 2000 for a number with a lot of zeros. Every person who came to the table had the same arc on their face. Recognition, then disbelief, then as the math landed, a slow and terrible anger. Delaney pulled me into the prep room. She was shaking. "Hollis, explain this to me. That is our grandmother. That cannot be our grandmother. Grandma died. I was 10. I remember the service. I remember Mom crying. You cannot fake that." I showed her the admission form. She read it twice and went gray. Then Thompson appeared in the doorway with her tote bag. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you both need to see these before dinner." She laid it out on a folding table. Photocopies? Years of them. Ridgeline billing statements every month for almost 25 years, paid in cash or money order, $3,600 a month. I did the math without wanting to. Over $1 million just to keep one old woman quiet and hidden 90 minutes up the highway. Medical records too. The stroke. For 25 years, I carried a grief that was never real, and the strangest part is how much that fake grief shaped me. I became a person who watches for the thing that's wrong before anyone says it out loud. And I used to think that was just my job training. Now I know it started in a folding chair room with an urn that held nothing. Watching my mother cry over a lie she'd built. The body wasn't there. The truth wasn't either. And a child feels that absence even when she can't name it. Here's what I keep coming back to. My mother, Genevieve, didn't fall into what she did. She chose it, one small decision at a time, and every choice made the next one easier. She put a pen in her own mother's broken hand 3 weeks after a stroke and called it paperwork. She told a facility that Adelaide had no family. She drained a trust 2.5% at a time, year after year, and slept fine because the number stayed abstract. Cruelty rarely arrives as a single monstrous act. It arrives as 1,000 reasonable-sounding shortcuts taken by someone who has stopped letting their conscience vote. The lesson I won't forget is that what you do when no one is checking becomes who you are. But knowing right from wrong was never going to be enough on its own. The reason any of this came out is that someone could read a financial statement. Thompson knew patients have a legal right to their own records. Wesley's brother-in-law knew what an honest management fee looks like and what looting looks like dressed up as fees. I knew, because I read budgets for my union, that I'd have asked questions Delaney never thought to ask. The truth needed people sharp enough to see it. Goodness without clear sight just gets taken advantage of. So I tell anyone younger than me to learn the boring things, the numbers, and the rights in the paperwork, because that knowledge is what turns a gut feeling into a case. And then there's the part nobody can do for you. After my mother drove away from that barn, I had a choice between a quiet check and a hard road, and I chose the hard road on purpose. Saying no to the settlement meant years of depositions in a trial and reliving the worst day and the best day of my life over and over. It would have been so much easier to take the money and stay silent. The thing that let me refuse was the same stubbornness that let me pay for my own wedding and walk myself down if I had to. You don't get the good ending by wishing for it. You get it by being willing to sit in the discomfort longer than the person betting you'll give up. My grandmother lost a quarter of a century. She'll never get back. I can't fix that. But she hums in my kitchen now, and there's a baby coming who'll learn to count on her lap, and my mother's empty chair taught me more about love than her presence ever did. Choose well when no one's watching, see clearly, and don't quit before the truth gets all the way out.